Well, welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. Of course, each week we bring you very important and useful information on issues facing baby boomers, their parents, and other loved ones. And I can't thank everybody enough for all their support. And of course, our listeners grow each and every day, and it's because of you sharing various podcasts or our links to friends and family. Many of you are listening to the show by going to our website at www.boomerstodayradio.com. But I'd say the majority of you are going on your phone on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, all the various podcast stations. So just really want to thank you. And I know our listeners are growing because we've got some great shows because we have great guests. And we're not going to disappoint you today. We have with us Tami Anastasia, who's back. We had her several years ago, and I'm thrilled to have her back on Boomers Today. She is a dementia consultant, educator, and speaker. She is the author of Essential Strategies for the Dementia Caregiver, Learning to Pace Yourself. Tammy holds a master's degree in counseling, a certificate in gerontology, and a certificate in end of life. She is an Evergreen certified dementia care specialist and certified senior advisor. Tammy is a sought after speaker, frequently presenting before audiences at professional meetings, senior retirement centers, memory care and assisted living communities, health and wellness conferences, local colleges, universities, and public health organizations. Tammy, we're thrilled to have you back on Boomers Today.
Well, thank you, Frank. It's a pleasure to be back and to hear your voice and be able to have a conversation with you again.
Yeah, no, this is great. And congratulations on your book.
Thank you.
That's very exciting. I know, as I think you know, I wrote a book as well, and it's an exciting thing. It was probably exciting to be holding it for the first time, huh?
It was a process, and by the time the book came out to be published, I really felt that I had achieved a huge accomplishment.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about the book in just a second, but maybe you could tell us a little bit more, kind of what led up to that. How did you become a consultant and dementia consultant, which is just so important. We need more dementia consultants like yourself because it's such a huge issue. But what led into that, and then what led into your writing the book? What inspired you to do that? So maybe you could cover both those things.
Yeah, so I've got my master's in counseling psychology, and I decided years and years ago to start a counseling wellness business. And so in 1991, I opened up my doors and started providing health and counseling wellness. And over the years, as things evolved, while I was getting my master's degree, my grandmother was diagnosed. At the time, it was called senility, but really, if you look now, fast forward 25 years, it really was Alzheimer's. But we didn't know Alzheimer's and dementia, 30 years ago. So anyway, a colleague actually knew what I did for a living and wanted to retire and asked me if I would take over facilitating a caregiver support group, Alzheimer's caregiver support group. And so I did, and now I do about five. I facilitate about 5 different support groups, and I have a private practice where I provide dementia guidance, care strategies, and emotional support for families and professionals caring for loved ones with dementia. So it just kind of evolved on its own. It's amazing how the universe kind of shifts directions when you leave the door open and are willing to try different things. And I have to say, it's been one of the best things I've ever done. I just thoroughly enjoy all my private clients. I thoroughly enjoy the people in my support groups, and I especially enjoy educating people, doing webinars, and now, of course, publishing my book.
Right. Great. Well, tell us a little bit more about your book. Who is it targeted to, and what do you think, if anybody got your book, and I hope they do, what do you think they're going to gain from it?
So I wrote the book. Ironically, I had the book in mind. I've been taking notes and jotting down things I wanted to include in the book, I would say for about 3 years prior to the pandemic. The pandemic hit, and I thought, oh boy, this is a great time for me to put my book and all my thoughts into writing. So the book is especially for the dementia family caregiver, and it walks you through the journey from beginning all the way to end of life. And what I found is, and I hear this all the time in my private practice and in my support groups, the families get a diagnosis, the doctors tell them your loved one has dementia, and out the door they go, and now what do? So the book really addresses and educates, prepares, and there's so many tips and techniques on how to deal with caring for a loved one with dementia, because there's so many changes cognitively, behaviorally, and there's so many challenges. And people don't know how to walk through this journey in a way that it does not affect them. They have to survive this journey in a way that it is not at the expense of their physical, mental, and emotional well-being. So I wanted to provide a book that literally walks side by side, hand in hand, on how to walk through this journey and make it as compassionate, loving, caring, and supportive as possible. So I educate the reader about how dementia is going to change your loved one, how dementia changes the brain, how those changes are going to affect you, and then how to deal with those changes. So it's equipped with a lot of information. So it's educational, it's inspiring, it's informative, it's a resource, it's a handbook. It's a book that you could pick up, and if you choose, you could read it from the beginning all the way to the end, or it's a book you can pick up and you look at tables of content and you decide, this is what I need to look at today. And you don't have to read it from beginning to end, although most people have done that. But many, many people have said, oh, my God, this is a book they keep by their bedside. So when an issue comes up, they can go right to it, and boom, there's the information you need.
So again, it's called Essential Strategies for the Dementia Caregiver, Learning to Pace Yourself, Who I Am and What I Do. So, and where can they pick it up?
You can order it on Amazon. You can also
Mhm.
order it through my website, which is TamiAnastasia.com, TamiAnastasia.com. But you can definitely get it on Amazon.
So I know our listeners aren't looking at this, but I'm looking at the words of your book, and you capitalize the word pace, learning to pace yourself, PACE, in caps. Why'd you put that in caps?
So PACE is sort of it's an acronym, and I put it in caps because what happens on this journey, it is such a long, long journey. It can be a long journey, right?
Right.
And if we don't know how to manage or navigate this journey, what happens is you expend all your energy. And often, like I said earlier, it's at the expense of your physical, mental, and emotional well-being. So I wanted to provide a book that paces, that teaches them how to survive this journey in a way that you can conserve your energy. And for example, just dealing with repetitive questions alone can deplete your energy. And I wanted to provide the readers with ways to be able to manage or handle dealing with repetitive questions so it doesn't exhaust you, it doesn't deplete your energy. And there's so many emotions that go along in this journey that I really wanted to provide a book that could pace you through this journey, again, so it can be as loving, caring, and supportive as possible. And also, it also gives you permission, and I talk about the different feelings that come up in this journey, the frustration and the anger and wanting this journey to be over, and normalize that these are common feelings. Normalize, validate that what you're going through is totally to be expected. And then educate you and equip you with how to deal with those emotions. So
Right.
it really is all about walking side by side with the caregiver and really teaching them, helping them to navigate this journey. So when the end of this journey comes, you're able to survive it in a way that will make you feel good rather than in a way that when you get to that end, you're absolutely depleted and exhausted and you have nothing left.
So you said something that kind of we probably both take for granted, and that is the knowledge that somebody with dementia, it's pretty likely that they are going to be asking like repetitive questions,
Yes.
to a family member. Um, why is that?
So I think that's the nice part. So the first part of my book talks about dementia, and it's not scientific by any means. I really wrote this book with the reader in mind. Keep it simple, make it easy read. What I mean by that, the print is large, there's spacing between the sentences because I knew my audience. My audience is at their wits' end. They're exhausted. They are struggling to deal with all of these changes, and I wanted this to be written in a way that the reader has easy access. So in the beginning, I talk about dementia basics. I talk about how dementia changes the brain. I talk about how dementia is going to change your loved one and know how to deal with that. And I talk about the symptoms. I talk about the cognitive changes, the emotional changes, the physical changes, and then equip you. So why do people with dementia repeat questions? The main reason is because those brain cells are deteriorating. And the brain is the central communication. It tells us how to think. It tells us what to do, when to do it, how to do it. And when those cells deteriorate, they're going to form what we call an altered version of reality. And they're not going to think logically anymore. So repetitive questions is a syndrome, is a result of dementia. It's not something they do intentionally. It's not something they do to annoy you. And you need to understand how dementia affects your loved one so that you now know how to cope with those changes. And that's what I teach in the book. So repetitive questions is a way of people with dementia communicating a need. And the need could be that they're communicating something important. They're communicating something memorable. They might be communicating something that they're worried about or they're concerned about or they're afraid of. And when we can sort out what that need is, we can figure out how to manage the behavior. And again, so it's not at the expense of you, the caregiver, but that you're equipped now and you have strategies and you know how to deal with repetitive questions.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm sure you've absolutely experienced this probably on a daily basis, but where a family member will say, "Well, I don't know if my mom, has dementia because yeah, she keeps asking me questions over and over again, but boy, does she, her memory is just unbelievable from years ago. I could talk to her about her years ago when she was in school or her work, and she remembers everything specifically, or she plays the piano beautifully. So maybe talk about that. Why there's that difference, at least maybe in the early stages or mid stages of dementia.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring up. So it is very, very difficult, and we all don't want to believe our loved one could have dementia, right? So the hardest distinction to make is this normal aging that I'm witnessing, or are these signs of dementia? So I try to put it in a frame of mind that makes it simpler to understand because it can be very hard to determine the difference. So normal aging, we will have moments of forgetfulness, right? What did I go in that room for? Oh gosh, that word doesn't come to the tip of my mind. But the difference is I'll be able to recall it eventually, or I'll be able to retrieve that information eventually. When we're erring on the side of dementia, they don't have that recall. They don't have that ability to retrieve the information. So, what I tend to tell people to do is if you're noticing changes early on, write down those changes that you're observing. They're more forgetful. For example, if someone is just an avid cook and all of a sudden can't remember recipes, that's a red flag. If your parent has always been so pristine and so efficient about balancing their checkbook, and now all of a sudden bills aren't getting paid, that's a red flag. Word finding, just not able to bring up the correct word. So what I recommend people to do is write down your observations, write down the date, write down the time, and write down what it was that you're observing. Because if it is dementia, it is not going to get better. It will slowly get worse over time. And so people usually are showing symptoms of dementia, I would say 1 to 3 years at least before they get a formal diagnosis. So if you're noticing changes, they will not improve. They will slowly actually get worse over time. So that's a good way of being able to track what's going on. And the nice thing about doing that as well is now you've got some concrete information to bring into the doctor and to say, these are the observations I've been noticing. We have some concerns, and then we can get the proper testing. And the other reason why this is super important is sometimes medical conditions can mimic dementia-like symptoms, and I talk about those in my book. And so if we have a medical situation, a UTI, urinary tract infection, or a thyroid, if somebody has thyroid and their thyroid is off, it could mimic dementia-like symptoms. So
Right.
it's good to go and see the doctor. So if there is a medical reason for what's going on, it's treatable.
Right.
If it does turn out to be dementia, then we can start treating the dementia earlier and see if there's a way to slow down the progression. Right now, there's no cure, but I always tell people trust your instincts. And trust your instincts, document the information. So now we have a real good look at how consistent are these behaviors increasing. We want to believe a lot of days maybe they just had a bad day. So I just really encourage people to write down their observations, keep track of what's going on, and trust your instincts.
You know, would you think it's safe to say, and then we're going to have to take a real quick break, but would you feel it's safe to say that if, like you said, dementia usually happens gradually. It could be like 1 to 3 years before it actually gets diagnosed, and you might notice things with a loved one, a parent, etc. But in those situations where all of a sudden the particular person is experiencing, horrible symptoms of dementia almost overnight. Okay, it didn't happen gradually. Wouldn't you say that that's a sign to really check? Because that could be a UTI, that could be a thyroid issue, and I've seen it. I worked with, I was advised of a family. It wasn't a client of mine that placed their loved one in a memory care location only to find out they had a UTI.
Mm, yeah.
So, what are your thoughts there?
So early on, it is a progression. if we see an abrupt change and a sudden change, either way, there's something that's off, and you want to pursue it because often dementia early on is a progression. And if there's an abrupt change, I would want to pursue that and rule out and do a full medical workup so that we could see what's going on, because a UTI can happen suddenly. Thyroid can happen suddenly. So I think what the message I'm going to encourage is, when you sense something is off, try to intercept it early, and let's go and see the doctor. Again, write down your observation, and let's do a full medical workup to rule out anything medical. And again, if it is medical, boy, we want to treat that urinary tract infection as soon as possible. Get on antibiotics so that infection doesn't become a more serious medical situation.
Right. So, Tammy, we're going to take a real quick break. I promise, just to recognize our sponsor. Okay, and then when we get back, we'll talk about maybe some of the most common challenges dementia caregivers face. Okay.
Okay.
All right, great. So, do you know anybody who may be concerned about an older driver? Well, Senior Care Authority's Beyond Driving with Dignity program is a facilitated self-assessment program for older drivers. This program has been designed to serve as a vital tool to facilitate older drivers and their families as they make appropriate decisions regarding the future of one's safe driving career. If the individual is a safe driver, an advisor will provide him or her with strategies on how to remain a safe driver as they progress through the aging process. If driving retirement is the appropriate decision, then the individual and their family are offered possible alternatives, resources, and a specific plan to ensure a smooth and successful transition from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. So to learn more, you can go to www.beyonddrivingwithdignity.com. That's www.beyonddrivingwithdignity.com, or call 877-907-8841 to connect with a Senior Care Authority advisor in your area. So we're back with Tami Anastasia, who is a dementia consultant, educator, and speaker, and author of Essential Strategies for the Dementia Caregiver, Learning to Pace Yourself. So Tammy, maybe we could quickly just start out so you could share, even though we mentioned your book earlier in the show, again, tell people how they could get your book, how they could reach you. It's commercial time. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you can order my book on Amazon, and you can also go to my website, TamiAnastasia.com. It's TamiAnastasia.com. You can also reach out to me and send an email at Tammy, Tami, at TamiAnastasia.com. And again, TamiAnastasia.com. And of course, you can always reach me through my website, or you may call me at 408-377-4716.
Great, thank you. So, before we talk about some of the challenges that caregivers face, maybe we could go back to some basics here and help us. We keep referring to dementia. I don't even know if we even said the name Alzheimer's in our talk so far. All right. But maybe you could explain the difference between the term dementia and Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia, like Lewy body, et cetera. You don't necessarily have to go through them all. We probably don't have time for that. But for people to understand the difference between the general term dementia and the various types of dementia.
Sure. So dementia is an umbrella term. Cancer, we have numerous types of cancer, but cancer is an umbrella term, right? So think of dementia as an umbrella term for cognitive impairment. And there's many, many, many different forms of dementia. There's actually over 100 different types of dementia, but we tend to focus on the four most common. Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia, and 70% of people with dementia are going to be Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's signature is short-term memory loss. Then you have vascular dementia, which has to do with circulation, right, blood flow. And then you have what is called Lewy body dementia, which is in the Parkinson's family. And that's that signature difference is there's going to be a lot of hallucinations. People with Lewy body tend to hallucinate. And then we have what is called frontotemporal lobe, and that has more to do with a lot of behavioral issues. We'll find extreme personality changes, but you'll see behavioral issues. But when you hear the term dementia, just think of it as a cluster of symptoms, and those symptoms may get more defined based on the type of dementia. So Alzheimer's, Lewy body, but we have alcohol-induced dementias, we have mixed dementias. There's numerous different kinds of dementia, and that's when you go to the doctor, you do want a full workup. You just don't want a one cognitive test and they say, oh yeah, your loved one has dementia. You want to get a battery of tests. You want brain images, you want cognitive testing, you want the doctor to ask a very, 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 very thorough medical history and family history so that we can get a definitive diagnosis based on a battery of tests, not just one. A lot of times I'll hear, well, my loved one had the MoCA, mini mental. Those are the two most common cognitive testing that's done. And they get tested once, and they're like, well, they scored high. Well, they could still score high, but have dementia, a form of dementia. So I very much encourage people, you do want to get a battery of tests. One test isn't going to give you a definitive diagnosis. So it's very, very important that you want to seek out a neurologist or a psychoneurologist, a geriatrician, but someone who has experience testing the brain.
Great. Well, thank you for that. It's a great explanation. So unfortunately, we don't have that much time. We just maybe have a couple minutes. And the question I'm going to ask you probably is going to take more than a couple minutes, but maybe you could, make it a little brief. But, maybe just some of the more common challenges caregivers that are caring for someone with dementia face. What would you say?
So I would say one of the biggest challenges is taking care of yourself. This disease is so demanding. It is so challenging. It can be on so many different levels. And it can be incredibly difficult to take care of yourself. And caregivers will often say to me they feel overwhelmed, they feel isolated, they feel lonely. They'll talk about feeling depressed. And so in my book, I talk a lot about, and that's what the book is for too. It's a tool to help you take care of yourself on so many different levels. And so taking care of yourself is a huge, huge challenge. Also dealing with the changes, the challenges, the challenging behaviors when your loved one doesn't cooperate, or the repetitive questions, or they refuse to do things. That is a huge challenge. And again, I walk you through that in my book. And I really encourage people to maintain as much connection with others as possible. One of the things that I'll hear a lot about is how isolated and how lonely the caregiver feels because friends and family drop off. They don't know how to interact with the person with dementia. And so all of a sudden they find their support network kind of dwindling. So I encourage caregivers to reach out and stay connected, join a support group or reach out to your faith-based community, reach out to community resources, reach out to professional resources. And again, the main thing is, and when we talk about taking care of yourself, it's on many different levels, and just simply taking a 10-minute time out, that I talk about a lot, is it's a way of making yourself a priority. We can get so inundated with all of these demands and challenges and responsibility. And I really encourage people to take a daily 10-minute time out. It reminds you that you're as important as the person you're taking care of. And I want you to do something nurturing and comforting for yourself. I want you to give back to yourself. So the book is chock full of a lot of different ways on how to navigate and take care of yourself as you walk through this journey. I literally am holding your hand, walking side by side, trying to make this as loving, compassionate for you and the person you're taking care of.
Great. Tammy, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers today. Really, really appreciate it. And check it out, Essential Strategies for the Dementia Caregiver, Learning to Pace Yourself. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Frank, for having me.
Yeah, and thank you, everybody. Please be safe out there. Talk to everybody next week.